Welcome to The Pictures Get Smaller. My name is Adam O'Connicky, and I'm the producer of this show. The things you will hear over the next 50 minutes or so represent the views of The Pictures Get Smaller and the people making them. All opinions and quotations in no way represent River West Radio and are the sole responsibility of the producer, guests, and callers. River West Radio is not liable for any legal issues arising from the content of this program. So good evening, and once again, welcome to The Pictures Get Smaller. I'm Adam O'Connicky, and I'm joined by pop culture gluttons Paul Gagliardi and JJ Birch. Before stuffing our faces tomorrow, we're going to chat about those pop culture delicacies in which we overindulge, those films and television series we voraciously consume to the point of obsession, which have shaped our identities to perhaps an unhealthy degree. Tonight we embrace those pop culture loves that resist our attempts at moderation, no matter how hard we may try. After discussing a few favorites, we'll turn our attention to broader issues of intertextuality and why we seem to be living in a period that encourages such overconsumption of pop culture. So maybe I'll get us started here with an admission of compulsive behavior. I just bought a second DVD copy of The Shining so that I'll have a theatrical widescreen version of the film and an open matted full frame version, which the box claims is, quote, as Kubrick intended. If any of that sentence made sense to you, then condolences. JJ, Paul, just how unhealthy is that level of obsession, and do you have any other issues of your own that will make me feel better about myself?
No, as I said in Facebook yesterday, this is time for an intervention. This is really, you've crossed over.
That's a threshold that's been crossed.
I don't. Wow.
But the image looks different depending on the aspect ratio. It might affect.
And do you have
the meaning
moods where you watch one over the other?
Well, I don't know yet because
You
I just
you
got
just
the open
got it.
matted
Okay.
version. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't really believe it's as Kubrick intended, but
You
in
just
fairness,
had to test it out to see.
it was super cheap,
Okay.
and so I
Alright.
felt like
Okay.
giving into some old completist tendencies from my
Sure.
younger days. I would at
Yeah.
least indulge that sort of itch for this time around.
If that's how you rationalize it, I think that's go for
Just
it.
this one time, really, just once.
Just the
Adam,
one. And
Adam.
you only have the 2 copies of The Shining.
Let's
No.
All right, sorry for the delay. We seem to be back and
Okay.
fully operational, as much as we ever are. And we were just beginning to talk about our pop culture overindulgences. I began by sharing my maybe unhealthy obsession with The Shining, and we were kind of going to get into other people's sharing in our little circle of trust here. So yeah, JJ Paul.
I'll go, I guess. I guess I would say I have an unhealthy obsession with the film Labyrinth. I have a line of the movie tattooed on my body. And I only own one copy of it, but I can quote it. I have friends and I have watched it just to see how far we could get by repeating the whole movie.
Watching on mute. And
Yeah.
that is impressive.
Yeah.
That really is.
Yeah. And I wrote my first academic grad school paper on Labyrinth, so kind of full circle.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's a good level of obsession.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Gosh, I would say The Simpsons.
Yes.
You know, sort of, you know, like not anything recently, but you know, like The Simpsons of the classic era Simpsons.
Which is what I'm gonna confess that I'm not a big Simpsons watcher.
Prime era is probably
like season 3 to season 9, I guess.
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Sort of the golden era.
Almost the
Okay.
first 10. And even the
Yeah.
first, I mean, yeah, from the start is pretty strong, although the first season is a bit off compared to the rest of the series.
Yeah. But yeah, there are episodes I probably can quote from heart,
Okay.
just out of.
Seasons you can quote from heart, really.
It's sort of a problem where I can, in most contexts, I can think of a Simpsons quote that either appropriately or inappropriately fits
Yeah.
the situation. So, yeah.
Well, as South Park has pointed out, The Simpsons have already done it, whatever you're doing.
That's true.
and thinking about.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was something like The Simpsons, which also is, in all honesty, another pop cultural obsession, I suppose. No, I guess I unconsciously quote The Simpsons. And there's others, maybe series or films like this. It sounds like maybe Labyrinth is that way for you, JJ.
Yeah.
But I find
think
myself,
I consciously quote it, but there are things that I will just say, and to the point where I don't remember why I say them or where they're from, but they are part of my vernacular.
I have
Yeah.
the same problem where sometimes I say something just out of instantaneous reaction, and where did that come
Right.
from exactly?
What did this reference?
Yeah.
Am I referencing something? I'm not even sure anymore.
Am I repeating
Yeah.
myself in some?
Right. Am I quoting myself?
Yeah.
Which I have done because I am important.
Yeah. I mean, I have a friend every year who sends me a lousy March weather text when March rolls around, which is a Simpsons line, although it doesn't, now it's not even anymore. It's just my friend's line. And I don't know. I can think of dozens others instances when I'm frustrated saying something like, shake your fist harder, boy.
Are these Simpsons?
These are Simpsons.
These are Simpsons
yeah.
references? All right.
Yeah.
There's doings afoot is another one of
Sure.
If I eat something that's spicy, I just say it tastes like burning.
Yes.
The Ralph Wiggum line.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
Every election season, I say no kids have messed with the Republican Party and lived to tell the tale. I mean, it's just instant. And I'm not sure what it says about us though. Like,
When we're constantly quoting things.
yeah.
So do you quote The Simpsons in hope that other people will catch on to the quote, or is it just so ingrained in your vernacular you don't even care? You're just like, I'm gonna say this, and I will think it's funny, and I'm the important one in my
Yeah.
brain.
Yeah.
I think something with Adam,
Right.
we do have that. We can quotes, and we know exactly what
Right.
the reference is.
Sure.
I think I'm at the point now I don't care anymore if
Yeah.
you get the reference. And so I've become like this esoteric,
This.
esoteric hipster academic. I don't know what you'd call it. I'm not really a hipster. But, well, if you don't get the reference, then that's to you. But yeah, I think it originally started because The Simpsons was a show that when I was in high school, if I could say something, that I could sort of sense who was watching the show and got the joke. And now I've said the thing so many times, Yeah, I'm a walking parody of myself.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is something about as you age. Now it's just because I enjoy it, or again, I'm unconsciously doing it. But when someone recognizes what I've said, then all of a sudden there's this sense of connection, and I think maybe there have been like friendships that have been sparked because of shared points of reference, right?
Sure, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, something like Arrested Development is very much in the
Right.
same vein where I'll say things and I totally forgot that I'm even referencing that show anymore, and then someone else will chime in, and all of a sudden we have this, connection.
That show is interesting to me because I've seen it a couple times, the whole entire series, but I'm not to the quoting level, but I appreciate the show, and I think it's really funny, but I still feel out of the loop because I don't know, it doesn't hit me as being a really quotable show.
I think
But people quote it all the
Yeah,
time,
that's
and
true.
I'm always like, why? And
Yeah.
then they'll be like, Arrested Development. And I'm
Right.
like, I've seen it like 3
Yeah.
times.
I don't think it ever achieved like the cult status, not cult status, but like the acceptance The Simpsons did for a
Right.
time.
I mean, The Simpsons has been on for so long.
For
It's
so
it's
long, yeah.
it's mainstream. It's popular as can be.
Yeah. There's not really Arrested Development reruns that people watch,
I guess. I mean, I
Right.
think that's been rerun on or syndicated on some networks, but
yeah, but not to the
Yeah.
extent like The
Yeah.
Simpsons or Seinfeld has, where
right.
you generations.
You don't see it at 6 o'clock every night, and then
Yeah.
again at 10 o'clock
Right.
Yeah.
for a full
Right.
hour.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, maybe. I mean, since we have these sorts of things, any other like ones that you wanted to share that were popping in your head when we were discussing this? I mean, there's plenty of
Like, are we
movie
talking like?
references.
Yeah, I tend
Like
to
Rocky movies, I sometimes quote like
Rocky.
yeah, like
Really?
well, there's
You're
the
with friends here.
villain characters, like Dolph Lundgren.
Sure.
I must break you or
Yeah.
something, right?
Yeah.
What's Mr. T's character's name?
Oh yeah.
I feel-
Clubber Lang.
Yes.
Clubber Lang.
Clubber Lang.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. So there's all sorts of points of references, and maybe it's a nostalgia thing, but I think it's also maybe there's something about our generation. We can maybe gradually get into this that's primed, so to speak, as I think one of you
Yeah.
mentioned to say this. And so maybe a few questions we might think about, ones that you two brought up when we were planning this, is considering why we lean on these references, like what they do, and I think we've started to talk about that a bit with the sort of kinship overshared
Right.
in jokes, or the questions of is this why are we primed to quote things? Is it a generational thing or a personality thing? And are there people our age or younger who don't incessantly pepper their conversation with ridiculous balderdash, to quote JJ's lovely phrase?
That was quite good.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So
I have two ideas about this. I think since I think I'm the oldest one here, I'm not really ready to say my generation. But do you think it's because in part we probably have been watching movies and TV shows because of VHS and DVD
yeah,
ad nauseum, so you can watch something to the point where you can learn the entire Rocky movie,
Sure.
the lines, or Labyrinth, or The Simpsons,
yeah.
and I think the internet too. Like
I mean, cable stations that replay the Rockies
Sure,
incessantly
sure,
is suddenly like
Right.
sort of mnemonic device if you want to learn a movie.
yeah, and I think too, it's also the internet. Like you can go to the AV Club or you can go to Facebook and type something in, and invariably somebody's going to get the reference.
Yeah.
Whereas if you had a smaller circle of friends, maybe 15, 20 years ago, unless they had all seen the same movie, that reference might just die in the conversation.
Yeah.
If that
Or-
makes sense.
Be uttered unnoticed. Right?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Well, I think that like you bringing up like the internet and repeated viewings, I think that's really valid for the like hyper usage of references that our culture seems to have, or our generation, or whatever. But my dad and like quotes stuff all the time, and he
Yeah.
is clearly older than all of us, and I mean, you can't see
Your dad's
how old
older
we
than
are.
you?
He is.
That's strange.
He is. It's weird.
Shocking.
I know.
Shocking.
But he's a quoter, and that's why I was wondering if it's a personality thing. Like,
Mhm.
because my family, we grew up
yeah.
quoting like stories my dad would say. Like, he would tell us a story, and like so that became like a Birch family meme. Like that's what we would quote all the time. And like, so he would have these stories. And then my brother is the type of person who can watch a film once and can quote just random things from it. And his son is the same exact way. So that's why I think at the rate that we quote things and, you know, do it, I think that is enabled by the internet. But I also think that there's something, I don't know, like something ingrained in us to repeat. And you know, I mentioned that also with like music. We've been copying music and narrative forever.
Yeah.
You know.
So maybe instead of the technologies like prompting this sort of referentiality, it's the technology is catching up to our impulses that we have.
And enabling us to do it at a faster clip.
Yeah. So family stories aside, like what are some things that your dad would quote? Because I mean, it's certainly like we've had a previous episode on the Pictures Get Smaller about cult movies, cult culture, and like those sorts of things fit the bill.
Like one of his favorite things is like that he smokes, and so like if something he always does the "we're going to need a bigger boat" from Jaws, the like cigarette dangling, and then so that's something. Diggstown is a movie. I feel like this is just a repeat. We always talk about the same movies when we get together, but Diggstown is a movie he quotes all the time. So not necessarily.
What's the period on that movie? Like when
Diggstown is like early 90s.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Mid 90s.
Okay.
I watched.
It's like early
It's James
90s.
Woods and Oliver Platt. I think Heather Graham's in it.
see.
So yeah. So I'm trying to think of like films maybe he or Saturday Night Live he would quote all the time.
Okay.
All the time. 10,000 Nuns and Orphans.
Yeah.
What's wrong about that?
Yeah.
Eaten by rats. It was the Saturday Night Live. I don't know.
That one did not die in the room. I got that one.
So yes.
Cheeseburger, cheese.
Yeah. Like so we grew up
Pepsi, no
hearing
Coke.
those all the time, and even saying those, and maybe not realizing what they were from.
Yeah, that you knew the reference before you knew the origin of it in your family.
Exactly.
Yeah. I probably was very similar. Like having heard about these things or heard the reference before actually having seen any clips. That's that's interesting. I wonder if, I mean, obviously we're just kind of purely speculating a lot on the show without having done any heavy research, but I'm still wondering if there's some sort of era or moment when this sort of referentiality became more widespread. It seems like comedies like Saturday Night Live, Monty Python, early Woody Allen movies. So things from the 70s and into the 60s a bit. So something about maybe that boomer generation on down. And again, I can't say if people from the greatest generation and older were quoting things incessantly to one another. We certainly have examples of texts that quote things. And we can, that's a whole other can of worms that we can get into in a minute, but there's something about these comedies from that period with their, you know, mainstreaming of sketch comedy through Saturday Night Live and the advent of comedies, the joke-a-minute comedies from, what is it, the Zucker
Brothers.
Zucker Brothers, with like Police Squad television series, the Airplane films. They're, you know, bringing this sense of you have to keep up with the references because we're referring to particular text, we're spoofing particular text, but then inserting other jokes, and that reaches some sort of absurd point with current things like epic movie, date movie, scary movie, where they're only references and not really jokes, or even Family Guy, which takes the sort of cutaway gag from The Simpsons, where they would say, "I wonder about this," and they would, you know, they'd show Homer doing something crazy in his mind, and that's all that like Family Guy has become. I mean, that's the knock on Family Guy. I'm not sure if that's exactly true, but certainly Seth MacFarlane has brought referentiality to a I don't want to call it an art form per se, but a convention almost.
He's made a lot of money off referentiality.
Do you like this? Because I like this, and now my cartoon characters are going to be doing this thing that I like and that you like.
And that's always the knock against Family Guy, is it's nothing but 80s references kind of slammed into some sort of loose narrative, which I mean, in comedy, right, there's the long kind of like the Chaplin narrative, which is kind of consistent throughout, and there's like the Buster Keaton where it's gags, and so I guess in the long view that makes sense, but can't really stand Family Guy. Some of the jokes are funny.
Yeah, I enjoyed it when I first saw it, and then it kind of the trick got old, I guess.
I think I had never like watched it repeatedly, so when I see an episode, it's funny to me.
Yeah.
You know, especially like certain episodes. But yeah, I don't watch it repeatedly, so I can't say like I hate it or I love it. But what I've seen, the like handful of episodes, I found
Yeah.
humorous and full of jocularity.
Somebody brought her the thesaurus tonight. It's
I'm just
insane.
Yeah.
But I don't. Going back to like, is it something about the Boomer generation that kind of cements?
Or the pop culture that came about in that generation.
That lends itself to incessant
Yeah.
referencing,
To quoting,
to quoting.
Yeah. Because, again, we were talking about this. There's certainly plenty of examples of text that
Right.
reference other text in overt or very, hidden ways throughout, I don't know, throughout all of time,
Right.
as if I were
Right.
an undergrad writing my second paper. Anyway,
Since the
throughout
beginning
all
of
of time,
time.
texts have quoted text and reference other texts.
I think my favorite, actually, just as an aside, was someone wrote this semester. Ever since the beginning of time, television's been
Oh.
a problem, and
It has, though,
Yeah.
since the beginning of time.
Since the beginning of time.
That's a true statement.
that's totally
Yes.
true.
That is truth.
Time only began when we could televise
Yes.
it, so.
I wonder if
so
they
you know.
mentioned or meaning Time magazine, and that might be no.
Wow.
No, still.
No, still. I wonder if it has something to do with like the Boomer generation of like the communication that was happening between, because I really feel like the reason that these things are quoted and repeated all the time is because they had easier ways to communicate with each other. It was like via phone, and there was more of like a group. Like people would watch Saturday Night Live in groups.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
it was an event. Like you did it, and we don't have that I don't think anyone watches Saturday Night Live like as the fun thing to do on a Saturday night. But I think that we have YouTube, and we have the
Yeah.
internet, and we have texting, and we have Twitter, and we have Facebook. So if we find something funny, we post it and hope we get likes or hope we
Yeah.
get comments or XYZ.
Or if we hear about something, word of mouth spreads
Right.
much more rapidly than it
because
ever
of those
did
avenues.
previously.
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
I don't know. But I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just going to keep repeating. I don't know. Just keep doing that.
Yeah.
That makes sense, actually. Yeah.
And I think another thing during that same period, like the mid 70s into the early 80s, that's the rise of VHS and Betamax
Betamax, yeah.
technologies, but ways of archiving, things that previously just broadcast and then went out
Yeah.
into the ether forever.
Yeah.
Well, it's sort of like what happened with Mystery Science Theater 3000, right? That for a long time was a very, very cult show on Comedy Central, and I think Comedy Central was only in like 50,000 homes at one point.
Yeah.
So people would make tapes and send it to, like, there was like some sort of network that developed, people sharing these tapes of this cult show.
Yeah.
Well, that happens a lot especially before the advent of the internet, in the few like readings on cult viewerships that I've seen, the tape making and the
Yeah.
exchanging of the tapes
Yeah.
and things like that. Like I know Twin Peaks, there were
Oh, right.
and Beauty and
Yeah.
the Beast fans did it too. So yeah, you
Wow.
remember that?
Yeah, sadly I do.
Yeah. Good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there certainly are things that aren't available except by tape trade. I remember
Right.
as a child, like I had someone make me tapes of the Batman serial from the 30s, I want to say.
Oh.
Yeah,
wow.
it was one of these like 10-minute installments before features that ran.
Yeah.
And so I had these tapes, and my the comic book shop that I went to that my dad brought me to, we made a copy of the tapes and traded them to the comic book dealer, and he was
Wow.
because those things had some like value because they weren't accessible, and now you can buy a DVD of them.
Yeah.
So there is something about, maybe a push towards cult tendencies too, for until more recent digital technologies and archiving capabilities. I'm interested in this thinking about the ways that we reference things and how we're almost encouraged to do so, or we see a model of this type of fan behavior, audience behavior in the text themselves.
Right.
And obviously it's nothing new, but it seems like so many series, television series, films are like a series of references to others. Obviously we have Family Guy, but
Right.
but from The Simpsons onwards, from going back to your examples, Police Squad, they're referencing clear, like precise things in pop culture and
Right.
expecting us to know it in order to get a joke, and then we respond to that text by quoting it and like expecting people to know in order to get the joke. So, I mean, what do we make of this interaction or this sort of sequence, I guess, of references of intertextuality within a film or television series, somehow directing us to respond a certain way, encouraging us to behave? Or is that just me sort of making?
No, I think that that's kind of indicative of our like whole like hypermedia culture. Like we are surrounded by media all the time, so to me that makes sense.
Yeah.
To have this like layered quoting, referencing thing that then ends with, well, it doesn't end. It just keeps going, kind of until the new show, the new thing comes out, and then we quote that or make a meme out of that, or so I don't know.
It does seem like somebody mentioned Community.
Right.
Right, is a show
Yeah.
that it changes its style from week to week, and I don't know. I have the same question as you. Like, what does this mean? And I'm fairly media savvy, but it's if I have to be expected to get the reference to get the joke. And there's like a conclusion there. They don't know what the conclusion is. Like, where do we go from
maybe we
this?
can talk about Community for a while, because it is sort of an interesting example of this. And the followers of Community, the audience, is really fanatical. And I would say probably quoted as much as Community quotes or references other things. And I've seen every episode. I think the show is interesting. I'm intrigued by it. But I'm not sure if I love it. I certainly don't love it the way some of its fans do on sites such as the AV Club, which just has a really crazy following. And I'm not sure what it is. I'm not normally put off by incessant references, but at the same time, I'm not sure if I am getting the emotional impact that some are. Like the referentiality is blunting that for me, but it doesn't in other cases. And so maybe one episode that comes to mind is it was a set up almost as a Pulp Fiction parody, or is going to be, and then it became a My Dinner with Andre.
Yeah. I think
parody.
I saw
So
that one.
it was a very interesting shift. And again, it was supposed to have this emotional resonance between the two characters. And the joke was also that they are tricking the audience by thinking you're referencing one thing. And then also there's this bizarre sense of referencing Pulp Fiction, because that in itself is a series of references to
Right.
60s French cinema, gangster films, among
Right.
all sorts of other things. So, with Community, and I think they call attention to this a lot of times within the show itself, just this like kind of hall of mirrors sort of sort of mentality. I mean, do those gestures resonate with you other than being playful, or?
I just think it's like a shtick that they have, and it's fine. Like, I agree. I think when I had television and network TV, I watched it, but when I got rid of my cable, I didn't have network TV anymore, and so I wasn't like, I need to find this, I need to download it immediately. I was just like, one more show that I won't watch anymore. And I think at that point it was getting super duper, like what you were saying, like
Sure.
referential, and like there was not, like, for me, the narrative from show to show, it was silly, and there was nothing to, it's like sometimes X would be with Y, and then in the next episode X was with double X, and so I was just like, well, I don't really care. Like, if this is just like a group of people putting on a sketch kind of thing, and like, what movie are we going to make fun of, or what trope are we going to make fun of this week?
Yeah.
When I think you can do that to a lesser degree and still have a decent narrative and keep people well, they don't have a problem keeping people interested,
Yeah.
I guess.
No.
Well, no, they did because it got canceled. So.
Well, they didn't get canceled,
Did
but
it?
they've gone through a lot of.
Oh, okay.
It's coming back, but the showrunner was let go, so this show
Yeah.
might be quite a bit different than
Okay.
it was.
Yeah.
Is that Dan Harmon?
Yeah,
Let go?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of people would make a different argument. Like, again, for a lot of people, that show, those characters resonate somehow.
Yeah.
And I feel like they should. In some ways, Abed, who's seems like has a touch of Asperger's or something, kind of almost resonates with me the most in the way that he finds meaning through referentiality. Whereas the others just seem to be playing a game, but he seems to be doing something different with it. So why then, okay, Community for the three of us doesn't seem to quite work, but, and I know, sorry, you're not a big Simpsons person, JJ,
Okay.
but Paul, like, The Simpsons has similar references. Some episodes are full-on parodies of like another text. Others just incorporate layer upon layer of references from highbrow to lowbrow, and that you buy into. Is it nostalgia for when you first saw it, or why is The Simpsons, at least in the prime
No,
era,
I
work?
think that's a great question. And going back to Community for a second, I liked it when it first was on, and I stayed with it until the last season, where I just grew tired of this. This week we're going to parody Goodfellas in very obvious ways, and or this week we're going to parody the shift from Pulp Fiction to My Dinner with Arthur.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I got annoyed with the Community for the same reasons too. There's no resonance for the characters for me, and there's no consistency between the characters. I guess you could say that about The Simpsons, but
Perhaps, I don't know.
I don't know.
I feel like the character development on The Simpsons is it's been on a gazillion years
20
longer
Yeah,
than
yeah.
Community, but I think I don't know. I agree with you on The Simpsons. Like, it doesn't seem as annoying as Community.
I think because The Simpsons I give it more leeway because it's a completely different universe.
Mm-hmm.
There are points at which the real world intersects with Springfield, but then with Community, I think it's the visual of actual people.
Yeah.
Where that I expect a sense of realism.
Unsettling about that.
Yeah, and then you kind of, and it's sort of my same problem with Glee, which I liked for a while, and then I didn't.
Isn't there an infamous article that Glee and Community are the same show?
Which I guess people in the AV Club cite is like that's their reference point of a horrible article. But it's true. But I think with The Simpsons, it was able to have, I think, an emotional resonance that lasted in some of the best. Like, I still cry if I catch the when Homer Simpson finds out his mother's alive.
Oh, yeah.
And
the ending, he's sitting on the roof of his car, just staring at stars.
It's just that's poignant,
Mhm.
right? But I've never.
And I think Community fans would find moments like that in Community.
Maybe I'm just.
They just
Do you think it's like? Did you watch The Simpsons from the first season?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, when it first came out.
I saw the
You
Christmas
guys-
special
I did too.
live when I was.
And did you watch it when it was part of the Tracy Ullman thing?
No,
Oh.
I did not.
Yeah, I did.
Okay, so
did.
you clearly have this huge background with
do.
The Simpsons, and
Yeah.
you had a good 3+ years before it got into the good stuff. And then it continued to be good. And I'm
Yeah.
just noticing what we're saying about Community and Family Guy is it started good, and then we kind of all just got sick of it. So there's something in The Simpsons because do you still watch The Simpsons?
Not.
Yeah, I stopped.
Yeah.
You guys don't watch it anymore.
I will watch it. I do pay attention to the critical reception of episodes.
Okay.
And I'm just curious. There were a couple of last seasons that were really, really good, but I didn't watch it live. I came in. I watched it on Hulu.
and you would watch
later.
certain episodes.
Yeah.
Not the whole seasons.
Yeah,
And so
it's kind of
you're-
painful for me at this point because the
you're
show's
like-
gotten pretty down. I just please kill it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
I've
mean,
been saying
I
that
think for me,
12 years too.
I sort of stopped watching because the characters quit. For a cartoon show, they stopped being characters and they became caricatures of what they used to be.
Yeah.
Okay.
And maybe watching from the beginning, I knew them as characters before they got into this sort of game of references. So when that happened, then it was like, oh, here are these characters trying on these things
Yeah.
instead of with Community.
It's
It started off as
people.
like a sitcom, and it was pretty strong right away, but the characters were still sitcom-y, and then they just jumped into this other sort of approach, and so I didn't really.
Yeah.
So now,
Have
Adam, like what you're saying is that now the characters have like morphed into like people-ish type. Is that what you're saying now?
With
Like,
The Simpsons, I think
With
they
The
were
Simpsons?
better written characters.
Yeah.
Even if the show was less strong, but like the first season was almost traditional narrative arcs in each episode instead of what it became, where
Okay.
it jumped around a lot. But they were actual characters. Like there's like some pathos to Homer Simpson or Bart
well,
or
right?
something.
No, and yeah,
And that's been lost
so-
maybe a bit over the years.
Okay, so that's
Yeah.
not as prominent.
And the
anymore.
sweet spot was when they could balance like
Yeah.
that characterization with the references. At
Yeah.
least that's my defense. I'm
No,
sure other
I-
people would argue
I-
that's the opposite.
I agree with you. I mean, it allowed. You could have episodes like the monorail, which is this crazy episode about the town building a monorail, a la. Oh shoot! What's the musical? Oh god, I can't think of it. The Music Man.
Oh, yeah.
The guy comes into town like, I'm going to build a monorail for you. And then there's another episode that season where
Great
it's,
Phil Hartman too.
yes, thank you. But then there are episodes where it's like, like Homer's mother, right? Which
Yeah.
is not a couple of seasons after the fact, but still it's very similar, where you do have emotional resonance. And I think early on with The Simpsons, the references weren't just simply, it wasn't necessary to get the joke you didn't have to understand the reference to get the joke.
Yeah.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So
Mhm.
like, one just popped in my head where Bart tries to steal Homer's jar of change and becomes a parody of Raiders of
Indiana-
the Lost Ark.
Okay.
But it's still funny
But
on
it's
its
still
own
funny
merits.
on its
Right,
own, even
right,
if you
right.
I
don't
understand
know.
it's Raiders of the Lost Ark, and it's that much.
If you've been living
funnier.
under a rock,
Yeah.
you don't
Yeah.
understand the Raiders.
Well,
of the
Where
Yeah.
if you don't get the reference in say Community, it probably wouldn't be as
Yeah.
Maybe
compelling.
that's our problem. Maybe we're not as cool as we think we are, and
My mom
we
says I'm
just
cool.
don't know that we don't know the references anymore.
Yeah,
And in the final seasons, and
That's interesting.
I'm just saying that could be it.
I see. Maybe we can move on to some other instances of referentiality. Because again, like this is nothing new, but
No.
my like thought was maybe the sort of predominance of these types of shows or these types of films is something that's new. Because we go back to, again, since the dawn of time, or whatever, 60s French cinema, and Godard is referencing all these other films, or I think I mentioned even someone like the high modernist James Joyce is.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You have a whole separate book as long as his novels about all the allusions to other like
references,
texts.
exactly.
So what are some other examples that maybe resonate? Things that you're just obsessed with, even if other people aren't.
I think a movie that I quote and I love. Actually, I always forget about this movie. But it also is about a man's obsession is High Fidelity.
Oh yeah.
So he is, everything in his life, Rob's life, is through music, through
Yeah.
pop records, and through music, and I think I mean personally, I can identify with that. And the movie is super funny, and
Yeah.
you have this like horrible person that you're rooting for, and you don't understand why,
Right.
but you want them to win, and so yeah, I think that's a good kind of. I don't know.
Sure.
And you even quoted that in your
that's
like
true.
call for people on the show. So
Original, not
not re-released.
released, underlined.
Oh,
Frank Zappa
oh,
records.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's a great quotable film, but also gets into, reason or that mentality in which you sync up your
An
life with pop
obsessive-
culture.
Yeah,
right?
it's an obsessive. It's an obsession. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I don't,
Yeah, you read the events, your experiences against a set of text, kind of, and that's. I mean, again, I don't know if this is something that's a recent development. I mean,
well, no.
works of
I
art have
mean,
always resonated with people for various reasons.
Yeah, I
right?
think
So-
that it has, and I think like with High Fidelity, you see that with music, and I think we can all agree that music is constantly. That's why we have soundtracks. That's why we,
Right.
and so I don't know if. And people have sung along with music forever. So maybe now what we're seeing is this move away from music into this world of film and television, and where that's what we quote and repeat rather than songs
Sure.
/ music.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Just throwing that out there.
Could be. Again, we're sort of speculating
Yeah.
here, but
This is not.
but yeah.
The other one, it's kind of popped in my head, the Edgar Wright films.
Oh, sure.
Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz.
yeah.
You have to be familiar with the generic conventions and these
Yeah.
references, but it's still, I think, kind of funny on its own rather than. But it's
Yeah.
essentially about, I think, in some ways, about guys that are obsessed with pop culture.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
Especially the character in Hot Fuzz, whose only understanding of police work is based on Michael
Jackie
Bay.
Chan and-
Point Break.
And Point Break, yeah, that's what I remember. Well, because I'm not a huge Michael Bay, Jackie Chan, so I caught on to the but I still enjoyed the movie a lot. I thought it was great, but I mean, the only reference I think I got was the Point Break reference.
Yeah.
So, and I think
Yeah.
that's because they showed the scene in the movie. I don't, because I wouldn't have. I think I've seen Point Break once, so. But I still found the movie enjoyable.
Yeah.
I don't know. So you didn't, like you
But I
said.
don't, it wasn't necessary to get the
Right.
references to get
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
the humor.
Yeah, and I think almost when I was younger, that's how I would get become aware of other things. I would
Right.
hear references and sort of fuzzily be aware that they were references and
Yeah.
seek out the origins of that, like seeing the airplane movies and tracking down some of those jokes, or I don't know, hearing people quote Monty Python, which is maybe the biggest example of a culturally quoted sort of thing instead of something that's quoted in other text, I guess. Sort of
Yeah, it was
stumbled
always
around there, but
it was always disconcerting to me when I would see something like even the Bugs Bunny cartoons.
yeah,
That was obviously a reference to something from the 40s or 50s, and a lot of the Bugs Bunny cartoons, they have the caricatures of 1940s Hollywood stars, and you'd see Humphrey Bogart in a film, and you're like, wait, that's the guy that slapped Bugs
Bogues.
Bunny in the face. Yeah, right.
Right.
Hey, that's okay.
That's true. I forgot about that, but yeah, that did happen all the time. Warner Brothers. Yeah.
yeah. Well, maybe we can just for the last 5-10 minutes here, just talk about some particular texts that we obsess over, others obsess over. What lends to them being obsession-worthy texts? And so, as it seems is inevitable on the pictures get smaller, I've got a little bit of a list here from the AV Club,
Okay.
just forwarded along by I think Paul found this one.
On this one, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, yeah.
what is
I
it?
did.
Pop culture obsession, yeah. And
Things
so
that are nerdier than those.
yeah, things that
one?
they geek
Right.
out over.
Right.
And so this list includes things such as, of course, Star Trek, Renaissance fairs, fantasy sports leagues, Michael Jackson, Wikipedia, Battlestar Galactica, Rocky Horror Picture Show, Joss Whedon, media-specific role-playing, Magic the Gathering, World of Warcraft, The Simpsons, Doctor Who, Frank Zappa, game show tape trading.
That was one I didn't know about. I didn't.
I missed that one.
Maybe this is the game show television era,
Well,
but
the list is
yeah.
4 or 5 years old at this
Oh,
point.
yeah.
So
Anime, cosplay, live action role playing. Yes, Second Life, MySpace, Facebook.
Oh,
that,
yeah.
that dates it a few years
Right.
somehow.
Yeah.
Fan fiction. So why are these things? They're saying these are things that geeks obsess over, and we count ourselves among that sort of category, even if we don't obsess about all of these things or even any of them, possibly. Why are these sorts of texts obsession worthy? Why do we overindulge, or some people overindulge on, I don't know, Michael Jackson or Joss Whedon? What lends to an
I don't know.
obsessiveness with Joss Whedon, who, if you
I don't
aren't
know.
familiar, he's the sort of creator of many cult shows such as Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Dollhouse,
Firefly.
Serenity. Oh yeah, Serenity's the film, right? Yeah.
Yeah, he did Firefly, and he does Cabin in the Woods.
Right,
and
right.
Avengers, did he do?
Yeah, he wrote. Yeah,
did.
Something.
he scripted those films. Yeah.
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 I know feminists love him because he does strong female characters.
Okay.
I guess. Whatever. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I'm not a fan of Buffy. I consider myself a feminist, and I don't care for Joss Whedon, but I also don't care for science fiction and fantasy, which I think 90% of this list is about. And I don't know why those genres lend themselves to such crazy cultish fanish behavior.
I mean, they're traditionally uber nerd categories, right?
You know, and
Things you can dress up and go to conventions. So like pre internet era, there are genres that inspired group gatherings,
Yeah.
right? Connections based
Yeah.
on just a like, just liking something
Yeah.
more than having anything else in common.
I mean, I guess there's other conventions for things that aren't on this list. Like, I know there's a Beatles convention in like Chicago every year. But I don't know. That seems like it's okay to be to fangirl over the Beatles.
It
or
seems like
whatever.
Everyone loves, right? You can't not like the Beatles.
I was just gonna quote High Fidelity, and I was like, no, I can't. We're on it.
That's true. How about Beethoven?
I hate
omitted
Mozart.
some words there.
No, I think they're almost all forms that are kind of not accepted as legit,
to
maybe.
do.
At one point, they weren't necessarily
Yeah.
mainstream.
Yeah.
Although now this sort of type of fan culture has become mainstream.
Well, and I think even some of those things have, again, it's hard for me to gauge because I am friends with like professional nerds, and I am friends with people who study Star Trek fans. So, to me, I'm like, oh no, that's accepted now. But like fantasy football or fantasy leagues,
Sure.
there's a show called The League that is
Right.
about fantasy. I think football, right?
Yeah,
Baseball.
at least that's
It's
how
not-
it began.
it's not
Like
baseball, yeah.
friends in a fantasy football league.
Yeah, and I mean, like, this is people post unabashedly about, like, XYZ, come on, I need the something to score a thing.
Yeah. Well, the rise of fantasy football is really interesting, and other fantasy sports, because it's making, a mainstream fan thing, something that is traditionally put into the category of what. If you're doing jocks versus nerds,
Right,
it's like
it's jocks.
archetypical category.
Exactly.
It's jocks, but now they're making it nerdy, right?
Yeah.
They're making it obsession worthy in a different way than like just supporting your team.
Right.
And so that's a whole. Again, there's something about that culture that's risen in the past. I mean,
Like
it's gone
nerd
mainstream in the
culture,
past
geek
10,
culture?
15 years, but roto sports have been around for longer than that. You just had to be really geeky to do it. You had to do a lot of math by hand.
My dad,
numbers.
my dad did a version of fantasy baseball or history baseball for. This is way back in the 70s and 80s. So it's it became mainstream. I think with the advent of the internet, which made it so much easier to trade your player and track your
Yeah.
and
stats.
check your,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
It just makes it easier now to be obsessive, to be a super geek, a super nerd about things that we love, right? I mean, it's easier than ever before.
True.
I remember in high school going on firing up the old internet and searching about The Shining and seeing what people had to say about it to circle back around to my earlier
Yeah.
admission. So this new, Room 237, a sort of documentary about people's crazy interpretations of that film, I'm sort of aware of. I mean, yes, lots of people were, but like, I read about those interpretations about
Long before.
yes, the American Indian references throughout the film when I was 14 or something and surfing around, because I guess I was being a nerd and seeking out some extra nerd info about the movie. So, yeah, any ways to wrap up here? I mean, we've confessed to some things. Any other confessions? Any other favorites that you just geek out over that you?
Roadhouse.
Oh. Hey.
It is
Yeah.
like the last 15 minutes of Roadhouse, I think, are the greatest example of American cinema. It's just so
Yeah.
beyond insane.
Yeah.
And I don't know why. It's
The lakeside fight is pretty remarkable.
Lakeside fight, and then the whole
With a
you know,
wonderful line we can't quote here.
No,
so
we cannot. But then also like the car scene as well. Car crashing and the shootout in the guy's mansion is just c'est
yeah,
magnifique.
Ben Gazzara is a wonderful villain. I
is.
love Ben.
Yes.
Patrick Swayze, he's the Swayze.
But it's any film I can enjoy ironically.
Sure.
I'm totally cool with.
Yeah. Yeah, JJ, any last thoughts aside from Labyrinth?
Well, I mean, Velvet Goldmine is my Shining. So this is a book. This is a
okay.
movie I've read like once I had the internet, which was not until I was even in college because I grew up in a tiny wee town. But I researched that, and that led me to go into like Todd Haynes and things like that. But yeah, I find myself like quoting Imgur all the time. Like, do you guys know what Imgur is?
No.
Really? Oh, okay. It's like basically it's like a Reddit. It's like an offshoot of Reddit.
Okay.
You know what Reddit is?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So it's kind of like an offshoot of Reddit. So it's a lot of images, and then it's
Oh.
like kind of memey.
Okay.
And but then there's sometimes like just really pretty pictures.
Mm-hmm.
So I quote that. Like if there's something funny on that, I'll quote that all the time. Or that like that Bill O'Reilly YouTube clip when he was on Inside Edition.
Yes.
I quote that like on a daily basis,
Yes.
which we cannot quote here, but
Yes.
daily basis. That's part of my vernacular. And Evita, who knew? Evita.
I did that for a
Interesting.
while with the Honey Badger.
Oh,
Honey
okay.
Badger clip. I was going around.
Yeah,
you know,
no,
Honey
I did that
Badger,
too,
don't
yeah,
care.
yeah.
I don't know what it was. Yeah.
Anything?
Kids-
What about you? Anything else for The Shining? Except The Shining?
Oh no,
Or
there's
is-
plenty. Sure, High Fidelity is obviously a big one. Yeah, with my friends and family too. My mom loves The Big Lebowski, and so
Okay.
Oh,
we have these shared points of reference. Yeah, I mean, a lot of this episode gets back into our cult episode,
know.
into our episode on spectatorship,
And there's
um,
sports one too. I feel like
and our
we
sports
brought-
one. Yeah,
I didn't
yeah.
mention Slapshot at all.
I know.
until
I thought
now.
you were going. to.
Right.
I
That
held
was in
off.
your-
I held
that
off
was
because
in
I
your list.
actually do have that film memorized. Yeah. Bus trips. We would watch it on the bus. Yeah, for
Like
hockey.
Oh, like
Yeah.
a hockey.
Yeah, for
Oh,
hockey,
okay.
yeah.
Well, that makes sense.
You had portable
Okay.
televisions or something.
Yeah, we would longer trips. We'd rent the travel buses and so
Oh, yeah.
yeah. But yeah.
In the pre-smartphone.
Pre-smartphone. Hold on. Let
You
me
had to-
How did
dial
you
this
do
up.
that?
In our day, our bus
Back in the olden days.
Back in the
had
day,
TVs
the early
to rent
90s.
a special TV bus, and it rode uphill both ways.
We didn't have
And it ran on dinosaur bones.
kids. We had mammoths pulling it.
All right. Well, speaking of mammoths and bones, maybe we should wrap up with Thanksgiving approaching tomorrow. We've got to get our bellies prepared for the feast. It was
I
a
had
very
no idea where you were
very-
going
I
for a
didn't
second.
know. I knew bones. I
very
was thinking
casual
it was-
segue.
Yeah. For the mammoth meal, we are going
Yes.
to
I
consider.
gotta brine my mastodon later.
We hope you enjoyed our sort of casual pre-Thanksgiving holiday episode of The Pictures Get Smaller. Thank you for listening to us take a trip down memory lane and geek out a bit about some personal favorites. Yeah, thanks again, as always, to JJ and Paul for being on, and we will be back next week chatting about some more excellent pop culture stuff. So, happy holiday, everyone, and have a good evening.